theirs is the changing the fastest, and it's the end of times, and the problems are insurmountable. So whenever I get a little bit too down about climate change and war, I pick up my Russian history and have a little dig around what the Russians have faced for pretty much any period in time, you know, pre-SARS and post-SARS. And so in some ways, I think, you know, I'm not saying stick to the knitting, and it's important to be aware of changes, but the traditional advice for, you know, good consultancy, you know, finding a well-paid niche, becoming an expert that is recognized publicly, doing great work for your clients is, you know, still 90% of what we need to do. Hello, Ruth. I've just seen you've joined. Lovely to see you. And so I think that's important to bear in mind, is that despite all this, and of course we're now more exposed to news than we ever are before, and it's very easy to get hung up on, or to get anxious even about a lot of the trends. So let's take it from the broad down to consultancy. You've mentioned a couple of specific things. The first is internationalization. The second is AI. The third that I'm seeing a lot of with my clients and the communities I engage with is a sort of teetering, this constant teetering on recession. And I think this is something that hasn't perhaps been delved into as much as it could be, because we haven't, at least in the UK, we haven't officially gone into recession, and a lot of the European countries are, you know, are surviving above the recession line. But it's tough times for a lot of clients out there. You know, costs, it's not just household costs that are up, client costs are up. And when that happens, they tend to pull back on discretionary spend. And so I think that's the third thing that's important to emphasize. And if you're feeling in the thick of it, you're not alone. It's not necessarily a solution to get out of it, but at least there's comfort in numbers. Let's take AI first of all, because I guess it's the most fascinating and new to us, even though various forms of AI have been around for a long time. They've never come close to the state that ChatGPT 4 is in, which I've been playing with constantly for the last 2 weeks, and prior to that, GPT 3 and 3.5. I'm running a couple of projects at the moment using AI. The good news, as far as I can see so far, is that there isn't a killer app out there that is going to replace consultants, as far as I can see. And I've done a fair amount of digging and a fair amount of research on this. So at the moment, as you say, things are changing incredibly fast. I'm seeing AI as a useful supplement to what we do. Potentially, if you've got a larger firm, reducing cost of operations, and to some extent, AI then fits into the usual automation and e-business stuff that a lot of consultancies already do, whether it's CRM or professional service automation, or just simply having your finances online and paying on your phone for things. And AI fits quite nicely into that, in that a lot of the junior consultants and some senior consultants, they admit it less, of course, are using it to supplement their proposal writing, their research, their analysis of data. But I think we're all aware of not only the mistakes that it makes, that perhaps a human wouldn't make. It's interesting, it's stronger than humans in some areas, but a lot weaker in others. But also the fact that it tends not to be, don't get me wrong, it can be creative, it can create art, it can write poetry, it can be novel, but it tends to learn off the general data that's out there rather than the specific value that we can add as consultants. Whether that's going to change or not, one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is to build, in effect, an AI chatbot that sits on top of a company's own data. So rather than it learning off the internet generally, it focuses on a company's data consultancy, and as you know, consultancies tend to be terrible at knowledge management, and would supplement and help junior consultants and save them going to bother partners, which is, if you're a partner in a mid-sized firm, you know that most of your time is taken up answering questions that probably a decent chatbot could answer. People on the call, Patrick, I guess, I don't know if you have any insights or specific uses that are of interest here.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, that's kind of like FAQs on steroids, really, for internal use, I guess. And I hadn't thought of that, but that's actually an interesting one. That's a repository mechanism which could have value. I see it. People have been talking about it in terms of report generation, and that sort of area. People are kind of saying that there is merit to it. Now, I've actually played around with it myself. The potential for disaster is huge. Because if you don't do some serious editing, you can come a cropper very quickly. And the context is everything, as we always say in terms of consulting. And while you can argue that 80% of reports can be, generative to a degree, it's that 20% actually where the real kind of recommendations and the value, and which, in fairness, most people will automatically go to, that I think the AI will struggle with at the moment. There are generic pieces that actually, I suppose, have some mediation that can be worked through. But yeah, I think the jury's out. I was looking at something there in terms of, for example, website generation. And people spend an inordinate amount of time in terms of website generation and cost. So I'd be interested to see if the cost of website generation kind of comes down considerably over the period. I think it is. I think it will. I think there's a huge element there. We had a meeting last night, Joe, and we were just discussing. I saw a piece of AI there, which I thought was really amazing, where you could have, say, for instance, we're having this conversation now, and Otter transcribes that conversation. So you give that narrative, that transcript, to a piece of AI software, which we had, or we have rather. It will generate a droid, for want of a better word, a virtual Joe or a virtual Pat, okay, in whatever kind of medium you're discussing. It'll also change it into any language you want, be it Mandarin or German or Swiss or French, and it'll do the course with a backdrop of the PowerPoint and so on. So from a course learning perspective, that's, I went, that really was a wow moment. I thought that's incredible in terms of your reach. Because I think we've moved to the stage now where these are very valuable conversations that you and I and the rest of the team are having, but that actual element for learning from the academic point of view, and the ability for consultants who do some training and training modules to go beyond just English, I thought that was spectacular opportunity. But again, the issue with that clearly, Joe, is the Comanche Nation will also see that as an opportunity. So, the amount of competition will escalate at a rate of knots accordingly, I would expect.
Yeah, and that's something that really worries me. I mean, we're used to the fake news cycle, but we're less used to the fake expert cycle.
Yeah.
And it does strike me that, in effect, if you imagine ChatGPT 5 is a step above GPT-4, is likely to be launched at the end of this year, and it could offer intelligent insights that appear to come from a human. Now, these are still, anyone who's an expert in the area is going to spot that these are insights, but clients by their nature aren't necessarily experts in the area. And so it does strike me that it's going to be relatively easy. And this is why I think I hate the phrase, to be honest, but personal branding, for want of a better, and visible expertise is becoming increasingly important, because building trust in you as an individual, as an expert, as opposed to, and everyone on this call will have be bombarded by LinkedIn requests promising to scale their firm to 7 figures in 3 weeks or less. Distinguishing yourself from that is going to be based on the strength of your brand. And I think that's going to become increasingly important as it becomes quite easy for these charlatans, for want of a better word, to pass themselves off as experts using AI and some of the tools that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it reflects back to a conversation we had during COVID, Joe, in one of those sessions we had. And I was just thinking about something you said, that the future is niche in terms of uber niche and that space. And really, listening to what you just said, that resonance strikes even more now, that the future in terms of personal branding will be niche. And for consultants, um, I suppose it speaks to the strength of kind of that uber niche skill set that people bring. But how will that affect the bigger houses, for example?
Sure. Yeah, and I would agree with you there. I think certainly for the smaller consultancies, doubling down on the niche is going to be more effective than seeking or reverting to generalism in some cases. In the bigger houses, I mean, the bigger houses, as we've discussed before, are partly driven by brand. And so, there are clients who are always going to buy Deloitte or McKinsey or EY as they're going to remain, just simply based on the brand. And smaller boutiques can't compete with that. What I see happening and the niche is an interesting thing. It's it's another reason for doubling down on the niche. It's very, very difficult for language models to present themselves as experts when it comes to a niche. What AI is very good at is answering generalist questions. And one of the challenges I'm having with this project is if for example, we take Ruth company, if you don't mind me mentioning you, Ruth, Y Comply, if Ruth presented all of her data, all of her proposals, all of her reports, all of her, even the transcripts of her conversations, there's not enough data there for a language model to pretend to be Ruth. And that's a wonderful thing for those that have niched. For the larger firms, where there are much bigger banks of data and thousands of proposals and reports and data banks and all the rest of it, the capabilities of AI are going to be much stronger. Now, that's partly going to be in terms of internal knowledge management, but also presenting that to clients. So what I hope wouldn't happen would be that large consultancies or any of us pass off AI generated stuff as our authentic voice. But there is going to be more value that can be offered by large firms simply because of the size of their data banks or data lakes to clients. And one can imagine a situation not too far from now, and I think actually some of the firms are doing it, where rather than having a load of juniors, providing, weekly reports or response to inquiries, you in effect have a bot that does it a lot better. So I think AI as a service supplementer has more potential for the larger firms than the smaller firms at the moment. I think there's a technical way around this that I'm exploring at the moment, but it's so boring. I don't want to drag you into it.
That's okay. You're in prime anorak territory here, Joe.
Okay, so very, very briefly. Okay, so you've got one big circle, which is what GPT is learning off at the moment, which is Wikipedia, the internet, and everything. If then you put a tiny circle within that, which is Y Comply, Ruth firm, then there's not going to be enough data that Ruth can generate for AI to be able to mimic what she does effectively. What might work is if you have a collective of firms that are prepared to share anonymized data that also do compliance work.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in effect, you get these you get a nested set of circles by which the language models become more powerful. That's the boring bit, so apologies.
No, we were discussing that, funny enough, in terms of the SurveyMonkey model, where they have generic questions that pull from right across the SurveyMonkey universe, which is not a similar model, because it is an interesting kind of conundrum. To your point, we would have people, for example, in the human resources space and so forth, and even on here this morning, but that whole area of culture and human resources is probably an area that's going to do well out of this particular space, I would imagine, looking kind of towards the future, because of the nature of the dynamic there is very kind of hard for a bot or an IT system to actually get its arms around, because it's human dynamics, it's human engagement, it's that intangible piece. And I suspect that's actually a subsection of the consulting industry that could do quite well out of it, just as we're speaking here, because of that difficulty that the AI will have to actually get its, at the moment. I mean, we can all look back to Terminator, and at that point where the bots become, kind of live, and we're kind of, that's always the fear, isn't it? In terms of it just going that stage beyond. And in terms of, I suppose, just generally the niches that outside of that one, Joe, that you would see kind of moving, as live potential, more fertile than others, what would you see as the ones?
I guess the obvious one is, well, two obvious ones. One is, as you say, any service where trust is important, and trust in the human element. And obviously, with culture change, with leadership coaching, there's the human interaction that's, even the best bots at the moment are struggling to replace that. And sometimes that face-to-face interaction, rather than interaction with a webinar, an avatar, is crucial. The second one is high value. So this is a point that's been going on for the last 15 years. There's been, if you imagine high value consultancy, which are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns for a client, and standardized consultancy, these two circles that overlap. And standardized consultancy, I mean stuff that clients could do if they had the time or energy, but they don't have that. Those circles have pulled apart, in that you can now charge a lot more for the high value stuff than you used to be able to, but the low value stuff has become increasingly commodified. And I see AI exacerbating that. And the stronger your brand, the more high value you are, the more I think clients are going to expect human interaction, rather than automated work. And that's not necessarily because the clients are making a logical judgment on the quality of service, but I think sometimes it might be because the clients think, well, I'm paying this money, I want to talk to an expert, a real expert, in inverted commas. The third thing I would say is obviously the implementation of this type of stuff.
Yeah.
With the low code and no code approaches to GPT, which are getting more and more frequent, because actually trying to understand the algorithms and the Python coding that you need to integrate them is it's not something that most of us have time or brain, certainly in my case, brains for. But I think the ability to spot opportunities to where AI can offer value to clients is going to be increasingly important. So I'm not saying that you need to understand Python or algorithms, but I am saying that a really powerful service for a client is just to be able to walk in, chat to their people, understand their processes and their structures, and say, there's an opportunity here to cut costs or improve value by using automation, ChatGPT. And as you say, it's relatively straightforward to knock up minimum viable products of demos of this type of stuff. You mentioned websites earlier. AI can also now quickly generate apps, web apps, software, and SaaS without too much editing on the human side of things. I'll give you a very brief example. Am I allowed to share my screen, Patrick?
You will be in two shakes of a lamb's tail, Joe.
Fine, man. Now, it's not the best website you'll ever see. I've got a client of mine asked if I could do some market research for them to look at competitors and how the market's changing. I didn't have time for it, so I said to them, I was quite frank about it, I've got two bright students who can do this. It's fairly standardized work. The students have done a very good report. I've said to them, they're looking for jobs. I said to them, well, listen, you did a really good piece of work here. Why don't you sell this stuff more generally? Why don't you offer it to clients? And they said, well, listen, we're going to need a logo and a tagline and a website and all the rest of it. I went to ChatGPT. This was last week, and created this. So ChatGPT, so this is competitive intelligence for cloud consultancies. This ChatGPT came up with the name, Nimbus Intelligence, came up with the logo, came up with the tagline, came up with all the data, and also auto-generated the images. Now, you might dislike the color and all the rest of it, but in effect,
Now, Joe, what you're showing there, I think, is probably not what you want to be showing.
Okay, right, hold on. Stop share. Stop share.
Close your eyes and brace yourself, everybody. The Lithuanian kind of transfer to your bank account really isn't all that bad.
Can you see that now? It should be a yellow and blue screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So there we are. So came up with the name, came up with the tagline, came up with, I'd say 90% of the content, came up with the images, came up with the design. It did this in 2 hours. I then paid someone 50 quid to tart it up a bit. And now the students have a business. Now, I'm not saying it's a viable business, but if you imagine 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, this would have been a significant amount of work and not an insignificant amount of money as well. So it just gives you an example of the speed and reduction in costs by which you can generate websites, web apps, etc.
Oh, it's extraordinary. I mean, I think the barriers to entry to that sort of space, given the fact the web is your shop window now, I think we had moved, you know, and I know you'd be an advocate of the Fiverr model, for example, where you know, you're using people with specialist skill set for
disposing of large items of electrical waste in Cork.
Forgive me, Bill, I'll just mute you there if that's okay. And Hilary, you're welcome. I think we've so yeah, sorry, I was just saying, I know you're an advocate, Joe, of the Fiverr model, and we use it ourselves and so on. It's very good, that kind of outsourcing of kind of niche work and so on, but that really leapfrogs even that beyond in certain areas as well. I mean, it's frightening at the speed, and it's wonderful as well that the cost has been taken out for the smaller players. I'm guessing. I would ask maybe if anyone wants to use the chat box, indeed, if they have any questions they would like to ask at this point, feel free to do so. Some of our colleagues, Joe, from our earlier glitch are coming over now, so they're coming into it, and we will share the presentation with them later. And we were just chatting generally, folks, just to give you a quick catch up in terms of the tsunami of Chatbox GPT level 4, I think it is now, coming on to 5. But if you park that, I mean, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole or the coffin hole of ChatGPT. What other areas are you kind of, when you kind of look out across the landscape of consulting and so on, do you see those kind of challenges that you're facing, kind of, if you look down kind of the way forward, to use Bill Gates's famous book from the early 80s, when he was looking out and casting his nets and what the threats and opportunities were? Where would you see the next 3-5 years in terms of consulting going?
Is this a question for me, Patrick, or is it a question for everyone? Oh, okay, right, yes, okay. So, I guess my specialism is smaller consultancies and boutiques. The large consultancies, my take is that you're going to continue to see a growth in consulting. It's driven by the types of things that, the consulting industry is driven by turbulence and change to some extent, and client ignorance of that. So I'm not seeing a slowdown in the industry generally. For boutiques and smaller firms, we've mentioned niche and the importance of niching down. We've mentioned the importance of becoming a visible expert and really pushing that with your branding. I guess the other thing, and you mentioned briefly, Patrick, internationalization. That's another thing. It does seem that most clients have now got used to the idea of consultants not being on site and are quite happy with the cost savings associated with that. There are lots of exceptions, of course, and larger consultancies seem to be reasonably happy with consultants working from wherever. so that's another trend that I'm not seeing is going in anywhere, especially when the war for talent. If you take that into account, I've had a few clients who've started to insist that people return to the office, and what happens is they simply disappear elsewhere. If those that don't want to. That gap between the high value offering and the more standardized offering, I think, is going to pull apart further. There's so much more even ignoring AI, there's so much more automation available to clients, and the more standardized work for them is increasingly being outsourced or put into offshore systems or managed services systems. So again, if those two models are pulling apart, you want to be in the high value, high cost, high expertise, known unknowns and unknown unknowns for the clients, rather than the more standardized stuff that the client could probably do for themselves but doesn't have the time or inclination. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about?
Well, I suppose, and I'll come back. Joyce had one on GPT, and we'll come back to that in a second to go around the circle again. But I suppose one of the mega trends clearly that everyone is talking about, Joe, is ESG. That, you know, as I won't say a Klondike, but there's a lot of people kind of going down that particular path at the moment, exploring the opportunity, because it is to a certain extent uncharted territory. Everyone is kind of learning it as we go along. Although sustainability has certainly been with us for the last decade, and people have very much kind of focused on that, it has become very much to the fore as a skill set within management consultancy. Almost, it's not a niche anymore. It's almost kind of a field in itself, and it's growing at a rate of knots. Where do you see the opportunities, for example, in terms of ESG for management consulting?
Yeah, you're completely right. Great insight. It's now the fastest growing sector, and just from personal experience, there's no reason why anyone would know, but 6 years ago I set up a company called Repair Cafe Wales. That's an environmental charity and has grown all the rest of it. And I've been approached by, just simply because I founded that, I've been approached by dozens of consultancies, some of them not small consultancies, looking for someone to bring in to head up their ESG area with the focus on the environmental, rather than the social and governance side of things. And the reason for that isn't because I know anything about the environmental side of things, but it's just that they are desperate for talent in that area that can be sold out to clients. And for me, it's a high growth space. I've got a couple of clients in that area that are growing, and I'd like to say they're growing because they offer brilliant services, and you know, they've got a fantastic niche, and that of course is true, but it's also because that area has taken off. And I don't think it's going anywhere either, and in terms of, you know, not just the PR side of it, and that is an unfortunate side of the environmental consultancy, the greenwashing, but also actual carbon reduction, emissions management, and all the rest of it. It's a massive growth area, and one where demand is far outstripping supply at the moment.
And I'm happy to add, Joe, as part of our offer here with the IMCA, the Institute, and you know, in addition to offering CPD certificates for people who attend, on this particular one, we're offering carbon credits for those that didn't attend in person this morning. So we'll send them out to you virtually. That was Joe. No, I think it's interesting because the whole lexicon of consulting has changed in terms of that ESG space, and there's the three separate strands that are in it. And there is almost a Klondike feel to it. It's kind of reminiscent of Y2K or GDPR when it came on, and there's a real rush. And even within that space, there is a lot of greenwashing going on in terms of people's provenance and skill set and so on. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, over the next 36 months, particularly with European legislation. And I know it doesn't necessarily wash to yourselves at the moment, but I think it will universally, you know, balance out in time. But that legislation that's vesting will hit a lot of firms in terms of reporting. So, you know, I know ourselves in terms of the IMCA will be looking at in terms of assisting members, I suppose, prepare themselves for that reporting cycle and how they can add value into annual reports and kind of get people in that space. But I mean, we've even discussed a STIG in terms of that ESG kind of consulting space, because there's no one actually, you know, that particular space probably deserves in of itself a community So we may come back to you on that as one of the founding fathers, Joe, because you were ahead of us drinking coffee in that space all those years ago. I'm conscious of people's time, and I'm also deeply apologetic for our own error this morning, although I think a lot of people have jumped over. Joyce had a question that, do you think that ChatGPT may focus on specific areas such as sectors, disciplines, in terms of relevant details instead of scrolling through everything? And that's going back to the discussion we had earlier. And I'm guessing it's, I suppose, a forecast she's asking, Joe. In terms of that, you can see the question there on chat. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, definitely. This is one of the golden eggs of AI. It's the ability. They call it local domains. It's the ability for AI to interrogate local domains. As I said, the data for a specific firm is rarely big enough for chats to offer intelligent insights as if they come from that firm. I think there's two solutions that don't get me wrong. If I'm thinking about it, IBM and Microsoft are already building it. The first is, as I say, building an intercompany a knowledge bank. So it wouldn't surprise me if we saw the rise of networks of consultancies of a similar type. And I don't mean all consultancies, the IMCA providing a data lake for all consultancies, but I mean specific sector consultancies. So if you've got 10 medium-sized consultancies that focus on leadership training, then the combination of their data is going to be much more powerful than one of them below, even though there's going to be differences in language and focus and all the rest of it. And I think that's going to have to emerge. The second thing, and I guess this is something that I would encourage you to start doing just in case, is that at the moment, a lot of our data isn't captured. And I'm thinking especially of meetings. We attend a vast number of meetings that aren't recorded. Now, Patrick, you mentioned earlier that Otter, for example, have the ability to transcribe this stuff. But I would encourage anyone that has a smaller consultancy or any size consultancy, start recording your meetings as a matter of standard, because eventually that data is going to supplement any data that you can provide chat, and it will allow you to provide more data, and therefore it would be superior AI. It may not happen. It may be that you just have banks of recordings that sit there, but the cost is virtually minimal. So I would start doing it sooner rather than later, so that when that offering is there, you're getting better insights from the data that you've got.
Okay. Has anyone any questions, just as we have a very kind of interesting audience here across a lot of different fields that they want to ask Joe as he's in the hot seat at the moment? I throw the field open. Excuse me. I'm always reminded at this particular moment, Joe, of the famous classroom kind of cycle where people kind of are reluctant to ask the question. But if they want to put it into the chat box, or indeed just come off mute, I'm happy to take any questions at this point. And Joe, in terms of, I suppose, the consulting profession more generally, do you see kind of that? I'll give you, I suppose, here in Ireland, we're seeing kind of an emergence of, I suppose, tripartite in terms of the younger kind of consultants coming out after doing the MSCs and so on. So they're either going to practice, or a lot of them are actually founding their own operations and having a crack at it going out on their own.
Yep.
And that's great to see. There's an element of crash and burn, but they're primarily IT driven as opposed to broader services. So it is kind of going down a certain path. But we were making the point last night as an observation that there is a generic feel to that in terms of their skill set, so that they're not getting that broader scars on the back through the life experience of having to cold call clients or go out and make presentations in front of boards and so on, which adds great robustness and value and texture to their experience later on in their careers. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people maybe taking early retirement. and going to that point we spoke about earlier in terms of uber niche, and they're coming back in maybe almost, I won't say a lifestyle, but as an addition to their kind of, I suppose, both to keep themselves intellectually aware, but I suppose because they have just a lifelong interest in that particular area, they go into that uber niche, and they get extraordinary high fees as well because skill has a value. Are you seeing that being reflected in the UK as well, or is it more generally kind of, I suppose, the traditional model?
You set that up for me nicely, Patrick. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm 50 this year, and I know I don't look
Not
because
Joe.
I moisturize every day. It's true, though. It's true. And I felt my age much more this year because I've had a few clients approaching me, young clients, and it takes me a while to understand exactly what they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong, they're not IT consultancies, they're management consultancies, but they're so focused on, cloud or cyber or AI that it really takes me a while to pick apart their offering. And I guess this is partly a weakness of me, but it's also, I would say, sometimes being led by the technology a little bit too much. And I think there is the silver bullet problem with new technology where especially young people think, oh, wonderful, let's see what this technology can fix, rather than what probably everyone in this call would do, which is to start with a business problem and then work backwards. And sometimes it's, a company yesterday I'm helping out, they were banging on about AI, and there's AI all over their website. It's not an AI company. They're putting it in there to attract investors, and it's disingenuous at best. And sometimes I think people, look for AI first as opposed to what's the business problem that we can solve. And sometimes that can be done with Google Forms or Excel or whatever else. But in terms of the general picture, yeah, a lot of new entrants. If you look at the multiples that firms are selling for, your traditional management consultancy with 30 people would typically sell between 6 and 8 times EBITDA. If you have a AI aspect or a SaaS aspect of that, it does seem that you're much more attractive. And I've seen a couple of boutique firms hitting prices of 11 and 12 times EBITDA, which I haven't seen previously. You see it with the bigger firms when they sell for obvious reasons, but you don't tend to see it with smaller firms. And so certainly investors, private equity and strategic buyers seem to be much more interested in the aspect of it, partly because of the demand, but also partly because those services tend to be more scalable.
So I could talk about this all day to you, and as always, you leave us with the pearl of most wisdom at the very end, the return on investment metric, which everyone I saw kind of sat up and took acute interest in when you used the ratio that jumped from 8 to 11. So on that happy note, I want to thank you so much and look forward to talking to you again. Joe has a book out at the moment, which I'd recommend to everyone, and we'll be sending out kind of some details where you can buy that. It's well worth a read. And as always, just a powerful tour de force in terms of sharing your knowledge, which is so well received. I cannot be more grateful, and equally at the same concourse, apologetic to those that were over on the other side from that technical glitch with Zoom. I blame AI, Joe, on that this morning.
Yes, definitely.
Blame AI for everything.
Thank you, Patrick.
As we say in Irish, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. We'll send out the recording. Really appreciate it. And Joe, again, I hope you have a great day, and thank you for your time. God bless everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.